Hey, welcome back to Feature Request, the show where you, the audience, suggest features and mechanics for a game, and then I build them. And then I show you how to do it yourself. Okay, hang on just a second. Before we get this episode started, I want to tell you about this idea I have. The channel has been very steadily growing, and it's making me consider a lot more things about how to run it and what to do with it. And one of the things I'm considering doing is a monthly contest where I give out a free Playmaker license to one lucky subscriber. So it might be something like you have to be subscribed and make a comment on a specific video or something, but I don't want to start doing this until the channel hits 1,000 subs. I've noticed that a ton of the views are coming from people who are not subscribed. So if you're one of those people who has come back to my channel and keeps watching my videos but has not yet subscribed, subscribe now, because if we can hit 1,000 subs, then I'll start doing the Playmaker giveaway. Okay, that's it. I'll give you a second to subscribe. No, it's chill. Go ahead. It's like 5, 4, 3, 2. A few days ago, Hellish Razor, beautiful username by the way, said, "I saw amazing content on your channel," and then suggested a feature where the AI would have a cone of vision that the player would have to avoid, which is perfect because I've never done that before, and that's definitely something that can spice up this fucking weird Frankenstein of a game we're making. We're going to come back to our NPC prefab. I'm going to double click it to open it up. We're going to right click on NPC, go to create empty, and you click that. You're going to have this new one. You can hit F2 to rename it, call it Vision. Now what you want to do is put this right in front of your NPC's face, kind of around eye level. This is where the sort of cone of vision is going to be projected from your NPC. The reason we're putting it here is so there's no weird collision things that happen if we put it actually inside of the NPC, because it might actually hit the NPC and then you have to do all this thing with layers, and we could avoid that altogether by just putting it in a better spot, which is kind of in front of your NPC's face, directing outward. Then we're going to put a Playmaker FSM on it and call it Vision Mesh. Okay, so this is what's cool about Playmaker. When I was prepping this episode, I had never done anything like this, and when I got to this part, I was like, okay, let's see what we have here. Let's see if there's anything that's already been given to us. So if we go over to our ecosystem, this is literally what I did. I just typed in vision, and boom, one of the first things you see is, or the first thing you see is dynamic vision cone field of view. There's one that's 2D2. We're doing a 3D thing, so I just got this one. Actually press this little button, this little question mark, and it gave me a little preview of it, and I was like, oh shit. If you click preview, it'll take you to the GitHub page, just in case you want some more information about it and it's not all displayed here. Yours is gonna look a little different. There'll be a little get button, so you're gonna click on the get button and Unity will start downloading that, and then it has to compile it. So just wait a second. It'll say Unity is compiling down here. When that's all done, then you can close this. Okay, so inside of our vision mesh, I put that dynamic vision cone field of view. So we're just using owner. This quality, I don't really know what it is. I didn't touch it. It might have something to do with like the resolution of the mesh that it creates, like how many vertices or polys it has. Next thing here, field of view angle. I changed this to 145. At default, it's something much lower, but I wanted it to be sort of kind of like about the edge of the peripheries of like standard human vision. Field of view max distance is 15. That means you could see 15 units ahead of it. It's layer mask. I don't have any layer masks on. Didn't select any of that. That would basically mean that it would either ignore or only include certain parts if you use a layer mask. If you don't know how to do layer masking, there's a little bit of layer masking later on, so just hang tight. So in this status part, if you hover your mouse over it, it says set the status by int. This int equals the material index. The status int is linked to the amount of materials used. Change the int in game mode to change the material. For example, 0 equals idle, 2 equals suspicious, 4 equals alert, etc. I set it to this int variable vision status just in case I want to change it later. By default, it's 0. You can see here it's at 0. If you go to our variables, go to our vision status, it's 0. So that means it's going to select element 0 from this list of materials. What this whole section is for is putting material on that mesh that represents the sort of field of view. So when it says right here 0 equals idle, 2 equals suspicious, 4 equals alert, etc., that means you could put a different material on it for each one of those states. But essentially what you'd want to do is kind of decide how many different material states there would be. You know, like, oh, I want it to be green when they're just looking around and nothing's happening. Then I want it to turn yellow if they saw you at like a certain distance or whatever, and then you know, red if they're pursuing you, if they're like totally chasing you, you know. So I set element 0 because by default it's going to be 0 as the blue transparent. So I have a material that I just made, it's like a slightly blue hue and it's like half transparent. And then I made another one that's red transparent, which is the same thing except just red. And I skipped a material here and I put it as material 2. And the reason I did that is because from what I can understand, unless I'm reading this totally wrong, is that this vision status int number, when it says, for example, 0 equals idle, 2 equals suspicious, 4 equals alert, I think it really did go by that 0 to 4 and going by intervals of 2, you know. So in order to get to the element labeled 2 in your materials, you actually need to go up to 3, which is kind of a weird thing, but you know, like, so for example, if I come in here and create a sphere, right, we have the sphere, and then it's in this materials area, it says size is 1. That means it has one element, one section for your materials, right? But if you wanted 3 different materials on it, you would put 3, right? So now you have 3. But look how it's numbered. It's like element 0, element 1, and element 2. Just kind of keep that in mind if you do decide to do something more elaborate when you're changing the materials of this mesh for your vision cone thing. Just keep that in mind. So now you know if you ever wanted to change which color the vision mesh was, all you gotta do is change this vision status int. So you're gonna wanna at least put something for element 0 so we could see it when we're debugging. All I have here is a blue transparent as element 0 and a red transparent as element 2. This optional target setup, the target is going to be player. You could set this as a game object. Since we're in a prefab right now, it would have to be a variable, so you'd have to have some sort of variable stored before this. But thankfully in this case, it's actually much easier than that. Our player, if we go out to our scene, where's our player at? Right here. With our player selected, you can see up here, it's tagged as player, right? From all these tags, it's tagged as player. So that means what we could do is just set or by tag to player. So all it's really looking for is anything tagged player, and since that's the only thing in here, that's what it's gonna be registering. So in this output section, this is kind of what it decides to do if it does see or register that thing we just told it, its target. So if our player is inside the field of view, it's gonna tell us right here, this little Boolean value is gonna be true. And we're gonna store that Boolean value in this new variable I created, can see player. So you literally just go down here, new variable, can see player. Update type setup, I put in as a late update. We're not force finishing. This ray gizmo is enabled. I have it checked, but I don't think it's gonna make any difference. I think I was just kind of fucking around with it. That pretty much has our whole dynamic vision cone field of view set up. So these next two actions are to account for some particle system stuff that we do later. The particle system is going to be interacting with the rest of the environment. And what's interesting is that this field of view mesh actually affects the particles. So it's gonna be this big plane that's like, it's like literally just shooting out like a plane from the NPC's eyes, right? So the particles, when I was first testing it, were kind of like bouncing on the mesh. So I put this get child and set layer here to make sure that the particle system doesn't interact with this vision mesh. Essentially what's happening here is we're saying get child, and the child name is field of view, because what's gonna happen is this vision is gonna create a new game object underneath it, and it's gonna call it field of view. So I'm just gonna run the game so you can kind of get an idea. Okay, now you see how it's like this plane, right? It's kind of like just shooting out from their eyes, and it's kind of like its own separate ground level because it's so big. So the particles were interacting with that. They were landing on it instead of going down to the ground. Now if we click on one of these little guys, you'll see that our vision now has a child underneath it, this field of view object. So that Playmaker action is creating this mesh here. And what we want to do is we want to say, hey, that mesh, we want to change what layer it's on so we could tell the particle system not to interact with it. So we're saying get child, right? Because it's going to be a child of this vision game object. And the child's name is going to be field of view. And then we're going to store the result as field of view. Then we have a set layer action, which we could specify the game object to field of view. That's what we just got. And we're gonna say that we want it to be on the layer ground. So that'll be the layer it's on. In order to put it on that layer, you have to go over here to layer, add layer, and then type in ground. So after you've done that, this is all set up. This whole vision mesh thing is set up. And those materials, by the way, if you're curious, just open up this blue transparent material. I'm using the universal render pipeline here, and I changed the surface type to transparent, blending mode alpha, and then in this base map I have this color blue, and then over here on this bottom part, that A stands for alpha, which means how transparent something is, and I just put that around the middle. Now you can add another Playmaker FSM on this vision object, and just call this one Vision. So we have Vision Mesh, the one we just made, and now we have this new one, Vision. So inside of this Vision FSM, we have a set FSM int, get FSM bool, and bool test. This set FSM int, we have it set to owner, and then the FSM name. We can click this little thing to see all of its available FSMs. We're clicking Vision Mesh. We're checking inside of that Vision Mesh FSM, and then we're going to get the variable name, Vision Status, that one integer variable that I made for the Vision Status, and we're setting the value to 0, right? So by default it is 0, but we just want to make sure that when this is hopping back and forth, over here it's going to be set to 2, because we wanted to change it to that second material, which is the red transparent. And then when we come back over here, we want it to be set to 0, so it goes back to the blue when it doesn't see the player. So after this set FSM int, you do a get FSM bool, and what it does is it checks that Vision Mesh again. This time it's looking for the variable name can see player. So we're gonna store that value here locally as can see player as well, and we're checking every frame, so it's just waiting for this thing to change. So whenever that FSM changes, this will be sure to get that update as well. And then that's followed by this bool test, which checks that can see player bool, and that's set to every frame. So this is constantly checking. Is it true or is it false? Is it true or is it false? We only have it set to is true. So when it is true, it sends this event fin. So fin goes from here to can see player. And now when it can see the player, we have a set FSM int that, like I said, sets it to 2, so it turns the material red. Right? Remember this? Let's look back just so you remember what I'm talking about. Inside Vision Mesh, if I click over here, go down here, this Vision Status is the number that we're changing. We're changing it from 0 to 2, and when it's 2, it means element 2 right here, which is this red transparent. After it sets that FSM int, we're doing a send event, which is gonna send this parent object, this NPC object. So you can literally just drag and drop NPC into here, right? And the FSM name is behavior, and the send event we want to do is chase player. So what's happening there? It's telling this object up here, we're gonna click on this, gonna click on it, and inside of its behavior FSM, it's gonna send this global transition, chase player, this thing right here. So you have two different types of transitions. You have these sort of normal, whatever, local transitions, and then you have these global transitions. Now standard transitions just go from one state to another, and they're sort of like hard coded, right? They're locked down by these little arrows. They say specifically where to go. But if it's a global transition, it's one of these ones up here, these dark gray bars. So you can set global transitions anywhere, and it'll essentially just kind of like break from wherever it is and go straight there. Last time we had these random positions set for this NPC, so this NPC is just finding random position, going there, arriving, hanging out for a second, and just doing that, looping over and over again, right? Just running around. Now it's gonna stay in this forever unless it sees the player. Because when it sees the player, back in that Vision FSM had that thing that said send event, chase player. So it's gonna tell it, hey, break from all this, go straight here. So this chase player is where it goes. And then it starts doing stuff in here until eventually at some point, it's told to go back from here. That's what this is inside of the Vision, inside of this Vision FSM. That's what that is. And there's a get FSM bool, which checks the Vision Mesh, can see player, and a bool test to check if it's true or false. So it's kind of like the same thing as the first one. Remember in the first one, we just have that bool test and this get FSM bool. And all that's doing is checking, can that Vision Mesh see him or not? So in the second one, the only difference here is that we don't have a true statement, we have a false statement. And so that is false statement will just send us back. So that's basically saying, hey, if we can't see the player anymore, go back to this first state where it says do not see player. So let's take a look at that new stuff in this behavior FSM. So this is on our NPC, this behavior FSM, we're gonna go inside of it. So now if we get sent here, this is the new stuff that we just added, this chase player stuff. So in chase player, the first state it starts off on, we have a find game object, which just says look for the game object with the tag player. There's only one thing, so it stores it as player. We store it as player. Then we set set agent destination as game object. The NPC is an agent, and we're setting this destination to player. And then we have a set agent is stopped, and we don't have is stopped, so that means if you were stopped, keep going. Then we have an animator play that plays the run animation. Then we have this get distance action, which checks the distance between the owner, which is this NPC, and this target, which is the player. Then we store that distance in this distance from NPC to player. This is a float. So then we have a float compare, which checks that distance that we just got. And it says, okay, check that distance we just got. We're comparing it to 1, which is 1 unit away, and it's set to 1 unit away because that's a pretty close distance between the NPC and the player at that point, and that's kind of when I would say, all right, you're within reach of attacking the player. So when you are that close, which is equal, right, or less than, that would mean that it's like, 0.5 or something, that he's even closer to it. So if it's either one of these, equal or less than, we send to attack, right? So this is this attack transition, which flows up here to attacking player. And we're gonna check every frame here. So it's constantly waiting, constantly checking. When is it that close? It's just checking over and over and over again. When's it close? We have another float compare here, and this one is for the distance between the player and the NPC being too far. And that's kind of when the NPC might give up and just go do something else. So we're comparing it to 15 now, and that's just outside of that range, right? Remember, we set that vision distance in the vision mesh FSM. We set that to 15. That's how far it can see, right? So if it's over this distance, which is the same, we have to set it to the same number. You could change it, but it's going to be confusing if you don't see that kind of line up with the visual, right? So when it's greater than 15, then we send to this event fin, right? So it's going to send to fin. And if it is, it just sends it back up here, and it just keeps looking for its random location and kind of doing its little just running around aimlessly thing. But if it does get close enough, if it is within this 1 range, then it gets sent over here. We have this attack transition. It sends to the state attacking player. And this is where we're going to activate a new object I created. So I'll click on this just to show me where it is. Highlights it over here. So if I bring this down so you can see better, this attack player, this is just an empty game object. I made it a child of this head top end joint. So it's the joint, it's the last joint of the head, of the character rig's head. So you could follow that from the spine all the way down. See, this is the joint of the head. And so we have this attack player, it's an empty game object, as a child of that. Now inside of that, I have a particle system. I renamed it blood, but this is a particle system. So all you have to do is right click on attack player and then effects particle system, and it'll create this. So over here in your inspector, you can see all of these parameters I set. You could press pause on here. I would suggest pausing on here and going through each of these and kind of making sure that you have something similar lined up. As long as your models are within the same scale as the things that I'm working with, this should be a pretty decent little setup. It's not some amazing, spectacular particle system, but it's just enough to kind of get you started, to kind of give you an idea of what you could start doing with particle systems. So yeah, if you want to pause on that, this whole opening section, and then I have emission settings, and I have this shape set, then I have this shape settings, then I have this color over lifetime settings, and then I have these collision settings, and then I have the render settings. Okay, so you can copy those down. And now I'll do my best to explain kind of some of the important ones, I think. This simulation space, I think by default it's set to local, but I changed it to world, and that means that if we move here I'll show you. So that means if we move these around, you'll see that as I shake it, if I put it over here, you can see that it trails behind, right? It trails behind. But if it was set to local, it doesn't do that. It's like fixed. It's almost like shaking it doesn't do anything, So it kind of breaks the illusion. So that's why that's set to world. And then emission, I just crank that up to 200 so I can get some more out of it. And the color, I set this red as a gradient between just like a lighter red to a darker red. So in collision, this is the thing I mentioned about doing some stuff with your layers. So back when we changed that mesh to be on the ground layer, so this is the section where you say particles are not affected by stuff on the ground layer. Do not interact with stuff on the ground layer. So right here where it says collides with, you can select this, And I think by default, like a handful of these are going to be selected. So here's where you could say the things that you do want it to collide with. I leave this blood particle system activated, but its parent, I'm going to deactivate. With it selected, and go up here in the inspector, and at the very top, you can uncheck that box, and that deactivates it. Now it looks like I deactivated the blood as well, and I did, but when I reactivate this attack player, blood will reactivate with it. Back in our behavior FSM on the NPC, that's what this activate game object does. It activates that attack player object, right? That thing that's here at the top. And the reason I put it on the head is because we want it to emit blood as if like they're just like chomping down on our player and all this blood squirting out. You know, you can have it set so the NPC stops and plays an animation of it punching or does something like that, you know? So this attacking player state, this is where you can kind of spruce it up and do whatever you want the enemy to do. So for this example, all I did was make it emit these particles, had that little thing, right? Then we have another get distance and float compare, which just says if it's further away than 1 unit, then you get sent back to that other state where it's going to be chasing it around. So we have right here, try again, and that gets sent back to here. And it waits to either get too far or to get close again, so it'll either go to here or here, right? So we're kind of hopping around between these three. In this attack player game object, the thing that has the particle system underneath it, I have another FSM on there too. And I also have a sphere collider. So this attack player game object, it has a sphere collider on it, and I made it just big enough to kind of surround the NPC, kind of like if it stretched out its arms in any one direction. And I have it set to is trigger. Then I have this attack player FSM on it. So let's take a look. So it starts with this register player part. So we have a trigger event on here, which says we're using the owner, and when something enters the trigger, which is this sphere collider, right? Because we set it to as trigger. So anytime something enters this sphere, make sure that it has this collide tag, which is player. Again, player is the only thing tagged that. We're going to store that collider. We're going to store the thing in here. So we're going to store the player game object into a variable. We're remembering what it was, who it was, the thing that entered. We're remembering what that was. That's what this variable is, right? And then we're going to send the event fin, right? So it sends the event and it goes over to doing damage. Now, here is where you can have it doing stuff, whatever it is that you want it to do. I don't have anything set up here right now because, you know, I have no excuse. Next time, right? Because I want to have the killing stuff next time, or the hurting stuff. I can make it so probably the next tutorial will be about you killing the NPC and the NPC killing you. And I think that's what this little section will be for. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back off. Right, and that's pretty much it. So if we run this, let's see what happens. So you can see what's cool is that their vision is being obstructed by those objects. You see, so if I kind of stand right, if I stand in the middle, it doesn't see me because I'm behind the box, which kind of doesn't make sense because I guess you would think that it would be able to see over the box, but you know, it works with these corners, right? See, can't see me around the corner. Well, that guy does because he's like right there. But I'm in his field of view, so he's chasing me. All right, I'm gonna run by all these little fellas. They all see me, so they're chasing me. And when they get close enough to me, they're just taking bites out of me. So all these colors and stuff, this is just for play testing, right? You want to make sure that it's working. And then in the actual game, you would just turn those off. And then see, when you're far enough, since you could run faster than them, if you're far enough, they'll just stop chasing you. Right, so we have some of these guys chasing me. Right, but as soon as I get out of here, turns blue, and just goes back to whatever the hell he was doing. Yeah. Oh yeah. Follow me. My children have turned on me. Come on. Everybody join in. Like, it's kind of creepy, right? But it's also kind of cute. Like, they love me. Come on, babies. We're going home.